Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today, I don't want to talk about a specific book that I read, but rather I want to talk about the 10 best books that I read in 2022. Since we are in mid-December, and this is usually when I make this video, really enjoy making this video because I again get to talk about some of the high-quality reads that I read in 2022. Just to say, I read a lot of really good books in 2022. And what's amazing is a lot of the things that I thought might end up on the list, like before I read them, actually turned out to be not as important or not as impactful as I thought it was going to be, which is a letdown, but also a fun surprise because sometimes you don't expect like a book to have a particular impact, and then it does, and you're like, wow, I'm glad I encountered this book, which I found in a number of the books that I read for this particular year. And there were a number of books that I wanted to include on the list, but I didn't necessarily have space for it because the other books were just way high quality. And in any other year, they might have ended up on the list, and that includes Mouse Part 1 and 2, The Silent Wife by A.S.A. Harrison, Julius Caesar by Shakespeare, Lady Chatterley's Lover, Tribe, the Tribe of Fatherless Girls by T. Kira Madden. Really wanted to put it on the list, but I had to take it off. Catch-22, which was really good, but still I encountered a lot of other high-quality books. And Stardust by Neil Gaiman, which I had to remove from the list because there was another Neil Gaiman book that interested me quite a bit more. Those are some honorary mentions, but not to say that they're not great, and you should definitely seek them out, especially The Tribe of Fatherless Girls, which is a Bevan recommendation. We read it for book club. You'll hear that a lot in this video. If you're looking for something good, check out those books or the 10 ones that I'm going to mention here. I should also note that I've been keeping track of the books I've read and the short stories in an Excel sheet. Strongly recommend doing that, not only so that you can, keep track of the books that you read, as well as the ratings that you might give them. But you can also keep track of author information, like where they're from and whether they're male or female or other information like that. It's just generally helpful to, figure out the trends in your reading patterns and change it if necessary, because sometimes it might be the case that you're reading predominantly white male authors, and is that the best experience for you? Is that how you're going to see more of the world? Stuff to think about right there. So I strongly recommend just finding some way to keep track of your reading so you can get that data down the road. Anyways, without further ado, let's talk about the 10 books that I really enjoyed. I'll provide a little summary and further analysis on those books, but I probably won't go too in depth. Check out my videos for more information on those books. Without further ado, let's talk about the books and then we'll move on from there. So number one on the list of books that I have is one of the best books that I read early in the year, which is Beautiful Country by Xin Julie Wang. It's a story about a girl from China who immigrates with her parents to America and encounters trouble in the American school system. She's fetishized, along with her mother. They're fetishized by a somewhat wealthy middle-aged man. And there's also family struggles as the mom wants to go back to China, but the father is very interested in staying in America. And I feel like it's a very good exploration of a true exploration, because this is based on Qian's own life, true exploration of the struggles of immigrating. And while I would say like her story is not that different from many other stories, and especially with the struggles, what really stood out to me was the end, where she talks about how this all affected her in her adult life, how she had to go to therapy, how it made her want to be an immigration reformer, and how ultimately she wasn't really sure if immigrating to America was the best thing for her, which flies in the face of like the concept of the American dream, where we typically view immigrants as better off than in their home countries. But Qian saying, you know, all these struggles, it did more to hurt me psychologically than anything else. So it's kind of a sad and melancholic ending, which my friend Bevan from No Channel, but my friend Bevan says I apparently like melancholy, which I think this book is a strong indicator of that. But yeah, I really liked what Qian had to say about immigration and the struggles of growing up. And again, this was a Bevan recommendation, so high quality book there. And unfortunately, like, because this was so early in the year, I frequently joke like this. Every other book that year had the unfortunate honor of not being Beautiful Country, of being a book I read after that. So that should also give you some indication of how much I enjoyed it. And then number 2, another Bevan recommendation is The Shadow King by Maaza Mengiste. It's a story of a fictional story set against the backdrop of the Italian invasion of Ethiopia during the 1935 pre-World War II period, focusing on a woman whose name I don't remember, and also an Italian soldier who is not so keen on being part of the war effort, and the atrocities that take place against the Ethiopians, and the struggle that this woman has in the story of dealing with the patriarchal Ethiopian society, which seeks to oppress her every bit as much as the Italian side does. And then the fascinating end part of the story, where, spoilers, the Ethiopian woman kind of reconnects with the Italian man, and in a sort of symbolic effort, kind of tries to boot him out of the country, because he's still the remains of the soldiers who had invaded her country before, kind of indicating that she's still dealing with that so many years later. And she hasn't quite gotten over the effects of being pushed to be in a war mindset. A lot worth exploring there, especially feminism and the idea of the patriarchy in Ethiopia, and how a lot is expected of women, and not a lot is given in return. Number 3 on my list is Sandman Overture. So this is the final installment in the Sandman series by Neil Gaiman. It was pretty excellent from an art standpoint, like incredible visuals and just a beautiful art style that demonstrated multiple artist capabilities, because I believe the portrayal of Morpheus was done from multiple different artists' standpoint, which it really helps make the Sandman series stand out, because again, he is King Morpheus, he's King Dream, but he's capable of taking on different forms. So even if like 2 artists like draw him in different panels and he looks different, like it still works. And I like to see how each artist has their own take of Morpheus, but also the overarching story of Sandman like encountering like some sort of rift in space-time and having to deal with his other versions of himself, all while eventually leading to what happens in the first installment of Preludes or something, Nightmares and Nocturnes or something, Daydreams or something like that, but like where he eventually like gets captured, kind of showing that his work is never fully finished. I really like that. It really shows Neil Gaiman's excellent writing. It also kind of highlights how sometimes the Sandman series really isn't so much about plot, it's more about ideas and the concept of dreaming and human potential, and sadness and grief, and getting over our sort of being in a state of funk, depression, or stagnation. And so Neil Gaiman continues to be one of my favorite authors. Number 4 is another Bevan recommendation. We need to talk about Kevin by Lionel Shriver, which might be the saddest book that I read in 2022. So we need to talk about Kevin is about the aftermath of a school shooting, and the in terms of what happens to Kevin after he does it, but also in terms of what happens to the mother and how she's forced to pick up the pieces and sort of recollect about how she hasn't been that great of a mother, and that her relationship with her son has always been confusing and nebulous, and how he seems to have loved her, but she never really returned that love because she didn't understand her own son, and also her coming at into conflict with her husband, who really loves Kevin, but he loves him so much that he can't see all the problematic behavior that Kevin is engaging in, and all of that combining to really demonstrate the tragedy at hand. Especially when you get to Shriver's depiction of the school shooting in general and how harrowing it was for everyone involved. And then sort of the unparalleled sadness that exists in the main character, in the mom in this story, and how even though she's sad and she feels like a failure as a mother, and that Kevin is kind of a monster, once he gets out of prison, she feels that there's a place for him to stay in her house. There's still that bond of motherhood and that connection to him, because maybe that's all that's left, or maybe she's been through so much she doesn't have the energy to fight Kevin anymore. Also, the concept that maybe not everyone should be parents. So there's a lot worth focusing on in this story. And the writing is really beautiful and of course, melancholic as well. And it really stood out to me and really hit me pretty hard when I did read it. Number 5 is another Bevan recommendation. It is True Biz by Sara Novic, a story about a hard of hearing deaf girl who goes to a deaf school, makes a lot of friends. It's really fascinating from someone who is focused on accessibility and disability advocacy, because you see a school where there are a bunch of deaf individuals who are more than capable of succeeding with their ability to do sign language, and as long as they have a place to thrive, they can be fully functioning members of society. But there's always those people in the background, those people who want those in the disability community to assimilate into society and take away what makes them unique. And so in the story, there's the threat of being forced to wear an assisted listening device, specifically a hearing aid or something more like a cochlear implant that actually causes headaches in the protagonist and does more serious damage. And ultimately, the characters come to realize that the oppressor is never going to allow them to just be. They're always going to force something on them so that they don't stand out. And I really like how at the end, Novic it just straight up says, sometimes you need to take the fight to the oppressor, in this case, burning down the cochlear implant facility, because there are no other options as society is willing to allow this to happen. Kind of a very radical message, maybe not so much in the current time, but it is still a radical message to hear somebody write down and say in so many words. So I really liked how it wasn't afraid to pull punches and actually address the reality that so many people with disabilities face. Number 6 on my list is Fleishmann is in Trouble by Taffy, Brodesser, Akner. Again, another Bevan recommendation that's also been turned into a Hulu TV series, which I have yet to check out. Currently watching The Sopranos, so I still gotta wait until I can get around to watching it. But I'm very much looking forward to it, as it has my sweetheart Claire Danes in it. She is quite wonderful. But yeah, Fleishmann is in Trouble is a wonderful story of divorce divorce, told from both the husband's perspective, Toby Fleishmann, and the wife's perspective, Rachel Fleishmann, kind of highlighting, you know, all the frustration that Toby feels as his wife grows increasingly distant and then stops talking to him altogether, kind of seeming like she's abandoning the children. And then we hear from Rachel's perspective about all the pain and anguish that she's going through in the aftermath of the divorce, and how she's kind of had to be distant and unemotional in her career because she's in a predominantly male-dominated career path, and any emotion or any sign of womanhood would just get her booted out, and she'd have to, or she kind of has to adopt male behaviors and be kind of hostile even towards her own family in order to really succeed, which is an unfortunate reality for a lot of women. But I really like how it's told from those two perspectives, and it really highlights how sometimes the best case is divorce. I know we like to proclaim that marriage is the be-all end-all, but if a marriage is in trouble and two people can't get along, like, divorce may be the only option. And I especially like the ending where Toby is sitting in his house and there's a knock at the door and Rachel walks in. Now that could be kind of a dream on his part, where he's kind of hoping that she shows back up, or it could be the reality. But that brings a lot of questions, like, would it work out if they got back together? Ultimately, I don't think it would work out between the two of them. But Taffy is willing to bring up these questions, and it makes it such a powerful book to read, in my opinion. It's even better when you compare it to something like Marriage Story, which a lot of people proclaimed as great in like 2020 or something like that. But that ended up falling a little bit flat to me, because at the end, it still seemed like I didn't care about any of these characters. Scarlett Johansson and Adam Driver did not do very good in that. I think they were just unlikable. And so, like, Rachel and Toby are very likable when you get to know them. And so it does that a lot better than Marriage Story did. And that's what I titled my video, like, imagine if Marriage Story was good. You know, a high quality story right there that I definitely recommend reading if you also thought Marriage Story fell a bit flat for you. I also read The Princess Bride by William Goldman, which was a book before it was a movie. I really liked the classic tale of adventure, very heroic, very much sticks to the formula that the movie would later borrow, of like a hero rescuing a princess and also encountering some strange characters along the way. But what really sets this apart for me from the other stuff I read is the meta-narrative that takes place, where William Goldman is writing as though he found a book from his childhood and is adapting it, abridging it, so to speak, from its kind of wild nature, where it was like a medieval commentary of the politics of Florin at the time. But it really, I think it brings up a lot of questions of like why we choose to adapt materials or abridge materials, like what it means to us, the classic hero tale that we all tell, and what we lose in adaptation, because although the current story is like a tale of adventure, like the real story is actually much more dry compared to that, and it actually has a sadder ending, whereas William Goldman wanted to get a happier ending. So a bit of an unreliable narrator there, and I'm sure like he didn't intend for it to go as in depth there in what I'm all saying, but it's all there, and so I think it's a wonderfully written book with a lot to think about. Number 8 on my list is actually a book recommended to me by Lucas over at The Bits of Lit. Go check out his channel. He also talks about some pretty high quality books and occasionally TV shows and movies. But the book is Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. A pretty amazing book. I'd probably say it's pretty high up on the list of books I read this year. In terms of what's on this list, it'd probably be near to the top. But this list is unordered, so don't worry about that. But yeah, Blood Meridian is just an Old West tale about a young man who goes from Tennessee to Texas and stumbles across a corrupt judge of sorts, travels with a gang, but they eventually all betray each other, and it ends with what I'm guessing is the young man's death at the hands of the judge. But what really interests me about this story is how Cormac McCarthy is willing to portray the West as it really was, whereas a lot of the West is portrayed, in many stories, it's portrayed as very noble and heroic, cowboys versus Indians, and the struggle to survive in the West. But here Cormac McCarthy is saying this was a hellish landscape where people constantly betrayed one another, and there were fights and lynchings almost every other day, and you couldn't trust anyone around you, which probably wasn't the case for what the West actually was, but I think it's pretty close, because rather than cowboys or Indians, it was cowboys versus Indians, like human nature, where everyone was willing to betray one another for even the slightest like insult to one another, willing to kill one another. And then you have the judge, who I feel best represents at least Cormac's view of humanity, where he's amoral, willing to hurt everyone, willing to incite other people to hurt everyone, and not willing to really stand up for anything except his best interest. Like as he says in the story, like the freedom of birds is an insult to me, which I think is deeply hilarious, and also very worrying. And then Cormac McCarthy's description of the scenery, which makes it sound like the story takes place in hell, and you could very much make an argument for that, where like the landscape looks unfamiliar, on fire, reddish, like things are dying all around everyone. It's a really terrifying thing to read at times, but I think Cormac McCarthy makes it work with his writing and with the point he's trying to make here. And then number 9 on my list is actually a random selection from my local library, which I'm very happy that I found. It's A Burning by Megha Majumdar, sort of a story of a young a young Pakistani immigrant who criticizes the Indian government for their handling of a terrorist attack, and then becomes the suspect in that terrorist attack. And the people who can speak out for her, a former gym teacher and a trans woman who she's been teaching English to, like they fail to appropriately help her. And what stands out and makes this like high quality in my eyes is that Majumdar is willing to point out that in India and many other places, like the justice system isn't really working for those who are at the margins of society. People actively portray the main character as this hideous sort of like villain who committed these heinous acts when they don't have any proof that she actually did it, and the people who actually did it are probably far along out of the country. But she's a great scapegoat because she's an immigrant from Pakistan who has said mean things about the government, and people are willing to capitalize on that. And so it's a very sad message, but I think it's one that needs to be said because this is what is happening to immigrants especially, but people at the margins of society every day, where the justice system just passes them over, and terrible things are done to them as a result of that. And then number 10 on my list, the last book here, is one I wasn't expecting to be as high quality as it was, but I'm very thankful anyways, and that is The Fisherman by Langan, which was recommended to me by my friend Sophia, aka the Loch Ness Monster. I really enjoyed the sort of exploration of horror that Langan does here, kind of eldritch, Lovecraftian type of horror, where like the main character learns about or the main character and his friends suffered like terrible deaths in their lives, and whereas the main character is kind of able to get over it, although as the story points out, not really. Like his friend is not able at all, and he learns of a sort of eldritch being that is capable of bringing things back to life, and he heads on over there, or tries to, along with his friend, and they also learn about the things that happened in the past, which are also deeply horrifying. But ultimately, the story focuses on like not willing to give up on your loved ones, the idea of Lovecraftian horror, and what we're willing to do to bring back those that we love, and also a little bit about male friendship, because it's And there is a very positive male friendship in this story that is only hindered by one person's inability to fully grieve. I think that's beautiful, because you don't typically see that many amazing male friendships depicted in literature. So like John Langan's writing is very fascinating, and this was definitely one of the more scarier books that I read this year, but it was also pretty high quality in terms of how deep it went into horror and how deep it went into subjects like grief and bargaining, really. So definitely seek it out if you're looking for something scary, as well as if you're looking for a book that has pretty heavy allusions to Moby Dick, of all things. Anyway, that was my list of the 10 best books that I've read in 2022. I don't think I have any doubts about that list. It's 10 really solid books, and the books that I gave honorary mentions to earlier, I don't feel could actually replace anything there. So I think it's a very set in stone list. I really hope the books that I read in 2023 will come close to matching my love for these books and the thoughts they make me feel, and the emotions that they make me feel as well, the thoughts that I think and the emotions that I feel. So yeah, if you have any comments on these books, or if you want to recommend something excellent to read in 2023, do so below in the comments. I would love to hear from you. It's always good getting a solid recommendation here and there. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that anyone else can stumble across this video and find more good book recommendations if they don't already have those in their life. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and 2022 travels. Farewell.